Hello and welcome. This is the Astrology Update Podcast. This time we're looking at the week of July 17th. This is one for the books. There's a lot of astrology happening this week. So there's not just one thing going on, there are many things happening at the same time. I'm not going to cover every single thing that happens this week. I really just want to focus on the big things happening, and there are too many of them, and this would go on way too long. So, Monday, we start out with something that feels really loud. Mercury squares Jupiter. It's not really that big of a deal, but just want to make a note of something about this that feels quite electrifying. There could be some kind of news or information that feels expansive or impactful in some way, so keep an eye on that. And then we have the new moon in Cancer. This new moon in Cancer is sitting pretty in a tight opposition to Pluto, which means that it's really good for dredging up the shadows or things or emotions around the situation. This is a really good new moon to nourish yourself in whatever way you need right now. This is a good day for blankets and journals. What emotions do you need to process right now? How do you need to care for yourself? Things of that nature. This new moon is also inviting us to dive deep into something. So if we're beginning something with this new moon, get ready for it to be intense. I'm not saying not to create anything with this new moon, as it's in Cancer, and Cancer is what it's ruled by, but just know that with that Pluto there, that whatever you do with this new moon is going to be intense, and get ready for that ride. So get a look at this. We're still not done with Monday. The nodes, the places where eclipses happen, change signs. The nodes change signs roughly every 18 months. When they do so, it means that there's going to be a shift to reality and a different tone to our story. The eclipses in Aries that happened back on April 19th was the first eclipse that happened in the North Node in Aries in like a couple of decades. That eclipse was technically when the North Node was in Taurus, but it's the closest it's gotten. Now, the North Node has officially moved into Aries, and the South Node has moved into Libra. This is a big shift for all of us. So the section in your chart that contains Aries will have an influx of energy. The North Node is about hunger and desire, what we want more of. Being in Aries, this speaks to an increase in drive, desire, action, courage, movement, boldness, and energy. On the flip side, the part of your chart that contains Libra is going to have the South Node. The South Node is about releasing and letting go. So the area of your chart that contains Libra is going to go through a big clearing and cleansing. So it's really important to know what part of your chart contains Aries and Libra. You can do this by going to any free chart creator online. Just type in your date of birth, time of birth, and place if you know all of that. Otherwise, the houses won't align correctly. There are methods around that, but you really should have your birth time. And that'll tell you all of the houses and where they line up and where Libra and Aries are for you, and how that would affect you specifically. This is going to shift things in our life in those areas of your chart that are being affected by this nodal shift. I just find it crazy though that this new moon is in Cancer, which is the sign it rules over, as well as the lunar loads shifting all in the same week. That's a lot of lunar energy. The air just feels electric, and at the same time, kinda heavy. Because that new moon is sitting in opposition to Pluto, it does feel intense, cathartic, and emotionally charged. Then we get a bit of a break until Thursday. On Thursday, hold on to something. Mars and Saturn make an opposition to each other. We're going to be feeling this all week, and honestly, a lot of last week too. We've been leading up to this moment from July 10th when Mars entered Virgo. This isn't something light. This is a big deal. This is the first time that Mars and Saturn are making an opposition in mutable signs. Mars and Saturn do not like each other and always cause trouble when they come together. This time around, they offer us an obstacle or a challenge that we must contend with. So you can think of this as a corresponding with something in your life where you're like, I really don't want to deal with that, where you just want to hide under the covers. But once you do, once we face it and are filled with an overwhelming sense of pride and personal power, it's the satisfaction of conquering a great trial, akin to that of like a hero's journey. This isn't an event that will leave you guessing. You'll know when you're faced with it. I highly encourage you to be patient and strategic. This type of astrology isn't a run-in with guns blazing energy. This is a strong, slow, calculated energy. For some of us, Mars will feel like a block. This energy is notoriously a no or a stop sign, or something that's a non-negotiable. In any of those cases, there's something to be learned here, and it's tough. That thing could be psychological, emotional, or personal. Either way, it's going to be pretty practical and down to earth. Please try not to overbook yourself this week. Just give yourself a little extra space to work through whatever the obstacle is here. Then on Friday, the sun makes an opposition to Pluto. So again, it feels deep and cathartic because it's Pluto. This is a moment where something gets uncovered, where something hidden or underhanded, possibly even, could get exposed by the light of the sun. Then, at the same time, the sun makes a square to the nodes that just change signs. This all has a pivotal energy to it, like we're on the cusp of a big change. So Friday does feel quite shady or like suspicious in a way. Like we should pay attention to what's being illuminated here, whatever the sun uncovers with Pluto. And that might specifically be on the world stage more often and not in your personal life, though personal things could come up too. Then on Saturday, Venus stations retrograde. This is what we've been waiting for. Venus retrograde is one of the biggest pieces of astrology this year, along with a lot of everything else that's happening this week. Okay, so Venus stations retrograde in Leo. This is dramatic, theatrical. It's like lights, camera, action. Venus is about relationships, beauty, and art. She's about what we entertain and feed and devote ourselves with, and Venus in Leo is not shy. Venus retrograde is a major moment, and what it teaches us is how to always go back and retrieve something from a part of ourselves that has felt rejected, maligned, or relegated to our shadow self. It's a sense of being in an underworld journey to reclaim our something that we desire, and that desire is the deepest feeling of our heart. Remember, retrogrades aren't necessarily bad things. It's the star going backwards in space from our perspective. They don't actually change course, but from Earth it appears that they do. And just like with Mercury retrograde, that we all might be more familiar with, it's about going back, uncovering something that wasn't really working. But with Venus here, it's more about matters of the heart. It's about how we take care of ourselves, how we feed ourselves, right? She's an earth sign, and she deals with the things that concern Taurus, being that's her home sign. So food and wealth and security and art and beauty and pleasure and sensuality and all the beautiful, tangible things of life. So she's going backwards now, making us look at all of those areas in our life, and especially wherever Venus is in your charts. That will shine more of a specific light for you on what Venus might be trying to teach you, or in some cases, when planets go retrograde, forcing you to go back and look, double check, look at the fine print, forces you to pay attention to the thing that never was working and now you have to deal with. So just pay attention to that. Pay attention to whatever themes Venus might be wanting to teach you with this retrograde. Okay, so a lot of this stuff, though, with Venus specifically, just as a side note, kind of reminds me of the story of Aset, or in Greek, as most people probably would know her, Isis. You know, this is a retrograde in Leo, and Leo's the lion, right? Leo's the leader. You know, its major star is Regulus, right? Lions need to be strong, and they need to be brave. And Aset, as I'm going to refer to her, she's a protector, a healer, a mother, a leader. You know, she's very lion-like and lion-esque. She's a lioness herself, and she reminds me of lions a lot. And I've seen her, whether or not it's actually part of her mythology or canon can be debated, but I've seen her a lot with lions and personally associate her with a lioness. And so this Venus retrograde in Leo just reminds me of her, reminds me of her story, right? This is matters of the heart being in Leo. This is, you know, heart on your sleeve situations. And it just kind of reminds me of the struggle that she had to face, right? She, you know, lost her husband and had to regain his pieces and went through the mourning of losing somebody, had to put him back together. And then her child, she had to give him up so that he could go away to be trained to one day rule Egypt. You know, her life was not easy, and, you know, depending on what aspect of her you bring out or talk about, you know, she is the goddess of 10,000 names. So she very much reminds me of Venus, who she's linked to, you know, in later traditions or teachings or whatever you want to call it. You know, she traveled quite far, and so Isis is equated to Venus a lot, you know. So when Venus does anything, to me it's like a symbol of Aset, of Isis. And interestingly enough, when that planet, when Venus goes retrograde, or even, you know, retrograde and forward, its pattern in the sky is that of a star, which is a symbol, one of the many symbols of Aset. So personally, you know, you can research her myth and look her up, her story. You know, there's many different versions of it and many different versions of her. But, you know, those things, those needs that we have, right? Venus is the mother. You know, Venus is the protector, a healer, a leader. Venus is many different things, and so is Aset. So wherever this is in your chart, whatever sector that Venus brings up for you, you know, how do we take care of ourselves? How do we listen to our heart? What grief or pain might be going through? You know, bring back in the moon, bring back in Pluto, bring back in the sun. You know, that hard event that could come up with Saturn and Mars. You know, this week is very much showing us, okay, so what aren't we looking at? What is our shadow self trying to tell us? What parts of ourselves do we need to put together? What do we need to bring back into light? And how do we radically care for ourselves and not be apologetic about it? That's a lot, I know. Okay, so after all of that, we still have more to go. We got Leo season. Leo season occurs. Leo, as we've kind of briefly touched on, loves attention, right? It's the showy sign of the zodiac, and it has the ability to get that attention, right? It has the nerve and the flair, and Leo is anything but boring. And we start Leo season with quite a bang, which is on brand. So I'm quite interested to see how Leo season plays out. Alright, and then on Sunday, we've got Chiron station retrograde. Chiron is a minor planet, so it's not usually the biggest deal, and this definitely isn't the biggest deal by far, but I always notice or pay attention to when a body, so a planet, major, minor, or even an asteroid or a point, stations retrograde or direct. When it says station, it pulls focus to itself. It always pulls focus, being Chiron, on a wound that we're working on healing or that we had no idea even existed. It brings focus to the pain that we need to acknowledge and can bring it to a peak. So basically, kind of like I was saying with the Venus retrograde, with the Moon and Pluto, with the Mars and Saturn, this is all about radical self-care and wounds and healing. So pay attention to your tender spots, give yourself extra care and the permission you need to heal. So even with all that, which I know was a lot, that's it. Yes, that's it. That's everything. That's the reading. I told you it was a big one. Just remember, though, we aren't controlled by the stars. Rather, they're a reflection of what's going on an inward-outward level. There's a saying in the esoteric world, as above, so below, as within, so without. And astrology is a physical and sometimes very practical version of that expression. The stars are just a mirror. They're a reflection of what's going on in the world, right? The events of the world are happening, and they will happen however they want to play out. But the astrology is kind of a mirror. It's a big picture, and we never really know how exactly the astrology is going to play out. We can really only take guesses. So just because the stars say this week's going to be hard doesn't necessarily mean the week's going to be hard for you personally. And again, that all depends on everybody's charts, because we're all different. Even people with the same sun signs will have vastly different experiences because of their charts. But it doesn't control you. We have free will and free choice to act and react to situations as they come. And the astrology is just a forewarning, a sign, symbols that, hey, guess what? The energy this week might be a little rough. So play it cool, and we can choose to heed it or not. But the stars don't control you. So if this week isn't something that's inspiring you, just know that you are the master of your own destiny, and don't let what the planets are doing or not doing get to you. Alright, so use this information to prepare yourself and give yourself some leeway when things get hard. Don't come down too hard on yourselves this week. Alright, talk to you all next week. Bye for now.